But what about this guy at the front? Well, obviously he's falling at very high speed. It's closest to the camera, therefore it should have some form of motion blur applied to it. Now, there's many ways we can do that. There's a motion blur filter that allows you to apply basically one axis of motion blur just across the front of the object. But there's also a way to do what's called a radial blur. Now, this is a filter that's been in Photoshop for a long time, but a lot of people are still not aware of what it can do. Let me show you. Make sure this foreground starfish is selected. Once again, Control or Command click on it to highlight it. Come up to the filter menu and back down to the blur submenu again. But this time we're going to go down and choose Radial Blur. Now this confuses some people because they look at the dialog box that comes up and they can see that the blur is going to apply radially. Now that means throw the starfish in a washing machine and take a photograph of it. You'll see it spinning around in the center, or a car wheel, something like that. However, you'll see up here on the upper left it says Blur Method, Spin or Zoom. Go ahead and choose Zoom. This is the same way that you would do motion blur coming towards you, and you'll see as you increase the value, the graphic in the lower right does show you exactly what's going to happen. I don't want to go too high on this. I'm going to try about 20 pixels to start with, and make sure that at the bottom my quality is set to best so we don't see any pixel degradation when the rendering is done. Go ahead and click OK and see the result. It takes a few seconds for it to calculate. It's automatically going to come from the center of the file because we did not choose a new central point. Once the effect is applied, we can now see this really cool motion blur applied around the outside of the star, with it really burnt out on the sides here, but a bit more in focus on the left-hand side because it's more towards the center of the shot. Now you may be looking at this and thinking, well, the motion blur on this object is kind of coming from the center towards us, which gives the impression that the shape is actually flying upwards. Obviously the blur is usually left behind. Well, this is a slight downfall to the radial blur filter we were just using because you can only apply a positive value as opposed to a negative one. However, we can kind of get around this by using some clever masking and a process which I just call selective motion blur. This means that we can choose which part of this particular image we want to apply the motion blur to and bring the rest of it back into focus, which will still help pull it towards us as opposed to pushing it backwards. So there's a couple of ways we can achieve this. First thing is just press Ctrl Z or Command Z on the Mac to undo the filter, and then let's come up to the Edit menu and you'll see an option there that says Fade Radial Blur. Now you can do this with any filter that you apply. This will allow you to take the same values that you just applied using the filter, but instead fade its opacity so it's not applied at full strength. So you see I could pull this down to around 50%. We now have a lot of the image still in focus and only just a small amount of blur appearing around the edges. Now this is an option. This is not the one I'm going to use, but I did want to point that out. It's a very interesting way to do some good visual effects. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. What we actually want to do is to have two of these layers and blur only one of them. So what I'm going to do is come over to the Layers palette, take the top starfish layer that we currently have selected, and drag it down onto the new layer icon at the bottom of the palette to make a duplicate of it. Now that we have that one, let's come back up to the filter menu, go down and simply choose the radial blur option that's at the top. That will reapply the same filter to the same value we had a second ago, but you'll see it's only applied it obviously to the top one. If we go ahead and hide it, we still have the original beneath. Now why is that? Well, that's because we have an in-focus one here which we can now blend with the other one. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on that top blurred layer. I'm going to drag it down so it's below the original because I want the in-focus one to be on top. I'm going to go ahead and select the in-focus one and then come down to the bottom of the Layers palette and add a layer mask to it. Now this is going to allow me to simply choose which part of the image I want to see in focus. Now the layer mask is currently white. You can see it's represented by the icon here in the Layers palette. And I can see at the bottom of my Tools palette that my background color is set to black. What I want to do is fill this entire mask with black. Very simple shortcut, hold down the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and hit Delete or Backspace, and that will fill the entire mask with black or the background color, which obviously in this case is black. Now you see that the mask is entirely filled now. We cannot see any of the in-focus image. All we have to do now is choose a large paintbrush, load it up with white paint, and simply introduce the area we want to see. So let's come up to the Tools palette, go ahead and choose the standard paintbrush tool. The foreground color is automatically set to white. What we need is a large brush. Now I'm just going to use my right square bracket keyboard shortcut to rotate through the sizes of the brushes. You can see I can pull up a fairly large brush. I'm going to go for maybe about 700 pixels. And do make sure it has a soft edge, and then just position it wherever you want over the top of the layer mask, and a simple click will just apply one splat of white soft edge color, That's all I need at this particular point to introduce perfect focus on the central part of the starfish, but the outside has just got that blur applied to it, which really finishes that effect.